So again, I want to thank everybody for coming out today, and I also want to thank everybody, all the groups that sponsored this today. Let me just go through that list real quick. So we have the Colorado Springs Area Labor Council. Thank you. The Rocky Mountain Sex Worker Coalition. Thank you. The Chinook Center. The Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. Colorado Springs DSA and their project, the Workers' Solidarity and Unity Project. So it took the labor of a bunch of people to put this together today, and a bunch of groups. So groups have their literature back there. If you want to check it out, please do. It's a lot of great groups. They're doing a lot of great work in the community. So it's important that we support them. Also, you know what? Like, a movement is building in Colorado Springs, and those groups are behind it. So we're here for May Day, everybody. Does everybody here know what May Day is, hopefully? All right, good. And if you don't, who cares? I don't care. You're about to learn what May Day is. All right. So May Day has always, it has really deep roots. It's always been a day of celebration, a day of celebrating new life and renewal. It has ancient pagan roots back in Europe. And when the Christians conquered Europe, they tried to get rid of these ancient pagan rituals. But those rituals stayed around, and they tried to crush them. But the peasants of Europe maintained those rituals for generations. And when immigrants came to when colonizers came to the United States, the Pilgrims outlawed any May Day celebrations because they thought it was too pagan, right? But when there were lots of new immigrant groups that came to the United States, they started to celebrate May Day again as a day when the world was turned upside down, when the peasants, when the landless people, when the people without power had power again. So May Day has these long roots. And so it was no mistake when in 1884, the National Trade Union Federation at the time said, okay, in 1886, May 1st, we are going to go on general strike to demand an 8-hour workday. So in 1886, unions and working folks all across the country, they've been trying to gain the 8-hour workday for years and years and years. It actually had become law, but there was no way to enforce it. And so workers decided, we're going to enforce this ourselves. They decided to take direct action on that day. So 1886, 300,000 at least workers went out on strike that day to demand an 8-hour workday. In Chicago, which was the center of the workers' movement at the time in 1886, 40,000 people went out into the streets in Chicago on that day. There was also a strike going on that year, or around that time period, at the McCormick Reaper factory. It had been a long, hard strike, and so May Day strikers went down to support the strike down at the McCormick Reaper factory. Well, the owners of the McCormick Reaper factory had recently bought the Chicago Police Department a bunch of new guns, and so while there was a struggle in front of the McCormick Reaper factory gates while they tried to stop scabs from coming in, the police decided to open fire on the strikers with the new guns that they'd been bought by the capitalists of Chicago. Several of the workers were killed. This was on May 3rd, it happened, so it had been a multi-day strike. Several workers were killed. And so Chicago at that time was the center of a very militant anarchist socialist movement. And so several anarchist organizations called for the next day a mass gathering in Haymarket Square. So the next day in Haymarket Square, there was a rally, 2,000 so people. It was a fairly peaceful rally, despite the fact that several anarchist organizations had called for revenge against the capitalist class, which was perfectly legitimate in my mind. The capitalist class has been killing us for, centuries. Sometimes it's okay for us to fight back. So they called for this rally. The rally went on for 2 hours or so. The mayor was there. The mayor decided, okay, you know what, this is fine. The mayor left, and the last speaker of the day, the police decided to move in onto the protesters, which I think we're all familiar with, right, at this point? They just move in on peaceful protest. So somebody, we don't know who, it's still, we don't know to this day, somebody threw a bomb at the police line as they charged in. all hell broke loose after that. The police opened fire on the remaining crowd, killing 7 workers that day. Several cops were also killed. So after that, the police basically rounded up every known militant anarchist and socialist in the city of Chicago and put them on trial. They put them on trial not because they were there. Most of them weren't even at the rally. They put them on trial because they were immigrants, they were socialists, they were anarchists, and they were militants. And that's what they were on trial for. They didn't even really bring up the Haymarket Massacre. They brought up their political beliefs. 8 of them were sentenced to the gallows by the state of Illinois. 4 of them ended up being hung by the state of Illinois. One of them was able to escape the hangman's noose. He blew up a dynamite cap in his mouth the day before he was hung in Chicago because he didn't want the state to have that power over him, so he decided to end his life rather than the state end his life. 3 more were granted clemency by the governor of Illinois because everybody knew it was bullshit, to be perfectly honest. So that is where this day comes from. We come out on May 1st to celebrate the struggles of all working people, all marginalized people, all oppressed people around the world, because after this, the International Workingmen's Association declared May 1st Labor Day, and it's celebrated everywhere in the world except for the United States, because the United States said it was too dangerous to the working class. The United States government at various times declared May 1st Loyalty Day. They declared May 1st Law Day because they thought there was too much socialism. They thought it might rile up the masses into socialism if we celebrated May Day. So for years and years and years, when workers came out to celebrate May Day in the United States, they were oppressed by the police, like they do, we've all experienced this. They came out and they destroyed them. And we were told that this was, a Soviet Union holiday. Despite that, we have continued, small groups of us have continued to celebrate May Day for years and years and years. This is why I'm so happy to see so many people out here today in Colorado Springs, because May Day is coming back, because working people, marginalized people are fighting back. We're starting to stand up again, right? So in the 1960s, another era of massive change in the United States, they also celebrated May Day. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this story. On May 1st, 1971, after Richard Nixon had decided to escalate the war in Vietnam to send more working folks, working class people, off to fight other working class people in the jungles of Vietnam, the May Day tribe declared a massive civil disobedience in Washington, D.C. that would happen from May 1st to May 5th. Thousands of people converged on Washington, D.C. on May 1st and camped out in Washington, D.C. to start their direct action on May 3rd. Nixon pulled all of their permits and sent out the Marines and the National Guard to round them up. Over the next few days in Washington, D.C., over 12,000 people were rounded up and arrested. They actually had to keep them in a stadium because they didn't have enough jail space. Over 12,000 people were rounded up in the largest mass arrest in the United States because of this massive May Day civil disobedience. And finally, in 2006, in the middle of what we're probably familiar with, we've seen this a lot lately, massive anti-immigrant sentiment that was going on in the country. Politicians were pushing anti-immigrant sentiment all over. Sensenbrenner had pushed a bill. People called it the Sensenbrenner bill. It was a draconian bill aimed at criminalizing the existence of undocumented workers in the United States. They would be considered criminals just for being in the United States without documents. They could be rounded up and taken to jail. So on May 1st, 2006, a group of immigrant rights organizations declared they were going to have a massive strike and boycott in the United States, inspired by the film A Day Without a Mexican. So on that day, May 1st, 2006, tens of thousands of immigrants and their supporters decided to go on strike and to boycott businesses in the United States. Here in Colorado Springs, there were 4,000 people in the streets of Colorado Springs. Immigrant businesses shut down, A, because they couldn't get workers, and in solidarity with immigrants. students walked out of schools all over the country, including here in Colorado Springs, which how often do we see that in Colorado Springs? I cannot remember the last time we had a student walkout. Businesses closed all over the country. The meatpacking industry essentially shut down in the United States on that day because they did not have enough workers. So they went out into the street, probably 250,000 roughly in the United States, went out into the streets. It effectively killed the Sensenbrenner bill. But it also showed the amount of power that not only immigrants and immigrants' supporters had, it showed the power of standing up together with one another. When we stood up, we defeated the bill. When we stood up in 1886, we won an 8-hour workday through direct action. It didn't take politicians doing things for us. It took us doing for ourselves through direct action, through organizing. So that's what this day is really about. When we come out on May Day, yes, we're remembering the Haymarket Martyrs, but we're also coming together to fight for ourselves, to fight for each other in solidarity with one another. So I want you to remember when we go out on May Day that this is for us. This isn't for politicians fighting for us. This is for working people, marginalized people, oppressed people, all over the world, standing up for ourselves and fighting for ourselves. Thank you. So just before we end this, I just wanted to start a little chant because we're gonna after the speakers and the music today, we're gonna take a march down Tejon Street. We're gonna stop by Hickenlooper's office because Hickenlooper we feel isn't doing enough to support passage of the PRO Act. And then we're gonna go down to the Pioneers Museum and march back. So I just want to get us warmed up with a few chants before then. So maybe you guys know this one. The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. All right, you guys are going to have to be louder than that. The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. All right, excellent. So thank you very much, everybody. Our next speaker